This show may contain adult language and themes. Listener discretion is advised. With that out of the way, let's start the show. You're listening to the Murder is My Sign podcast, the true crime astrology podcast, and I'm your host, Jordy Death, here to light your way through the true crime astrology storm. Welcome to part 3 of Killer Couple Bonnie and Clyde. In the last episode, we covered the shenanigans that the Barrow gang got into, and what a failure they ended up being as a gang. We left off with Clyde's brother, Buck, dying after being shot in the head and surprisingly living for 5 days, and Buck's wife Blanche being captured by the police and blinded in her eye by shattering glass from the shootout. And while Shit for Brains WD is leaving for Houston, well, Bonnie and Clyde went for Dallas, only to be arrested. Oh, and let us not forget that Bonnie sustained third-degree burns on her right leg thanks to the impeccable driving skills of her beau, Clyde, who was also shit for brains and ignored a very important road signs such as, bridge out ahead. We continue. A few former gang members were imprisoned at Eastham, and Clyde planned an escape to get his buddies out. So on January 16th, 1934, a raid happened on the prison, and Raymond Hamilton, Iverson Methvin, Joe Palmer, and several other inmates escaped in the Eastham breakout. During the kerfuffle, Joe Palmer shot Major Joe Crowson, which resulted in his death a few days later. This attack and escape humiliated the Texas Department of Corrections, which made Clyde extremely happy. However, you don't fuck with Texas, and the death of Major Joe Crowson brought down the full power and wrath of Texas and federal governments upon their heads. Enter Frank Hammer, Texas Ranger. At the time, Hammer was retired, but was well renowned for his exceedingly good work at being able to track down his bounties and bring the bodies back. He had 80 notches on his gun already and was more than happy to bring the Barrow gang to justice. Little side note, Frank Hammer was perhaps one of the best American lawmen of the 20th century. He also led the fight against the Ku Klux Klan in Texas and reportedly saved at least 15 people from lynch mobs. Or so says his Wikipedia page. He seems like the original badass, and I would love to see a movie based on his life. Wait. Didn't Netflix release a movie called The Highwaymen? Oh yeah, that's right. It came out last year. It's based actually on the men who tracked down Bonnie and Clyde. It's based on Frank Hammer. Whoops, I totally forgot about that movie until I started doing research for this podcast. Shit. Well, okay. Side note, having now remembered this, I did go back and actually watch the movie, and I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. If you have Netflix, I highly recommend you taking the time to check it out. Kevin Costner plays Frank Hammer, and Woody Harrelson plays Mamie Galt, his partner who helps track down the Barrow gang. And like I said, I recommend checking it out if you're a fan of biographical crime dramas. Bonnie and Clyde only make brief appearances in the movie, and remember, this is a biopic on Frank Hammer, not necessarily Bonnie and Clyde. The movie focuses on Hammer coming out of retirement and trying to track them down, while other police officials do the same and more or less impede on his work. What the movie does do a great job of, though, and something that I really didn't talk much about, was that Bonnie and Clyde, although gangsters and hated fiercely by the law, rose to fame and stardom amongst the public who had grown jaded from lack of money, jobs, and booze. Let us not forget that the Great Depression is still in full swing, with unemployment at 21%. And with the terrible drought that was happening in the Midwest, dust storms ravaged the land and continued into what we call the Dust Bowl. Prohibition, thankfully, had just recently ended in December of 1933, but the movie does a really good job of depicting what life was like for both the influential, like the governors and the law enforcement, and for the typical layperson who was struggling to find work. It shows the camps that people were basically forced to live into while their homes were repossessed by the bank. The Great Depression would last for another 8 years, through until 1941, when the United States entered World War II after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. And from the little bit of background research I did on the Great Depression, even though the job market essentially boomed, thanks in part to the war effort, the national debt actually increased quite substantially, from $41 billion in 1941 to $260 billion in 1945 at the end of the war. So what does all this have to do with Bonnie and Clyde becoming famous with the public? Well, they were kind of like Robin Hood and his merry men, stealing from the rich, i.e. banks, even though they're pretty bad at it, and sometimes giving it to the poor. They would often pay off people when they came down in order to hide their whereabouts from the law, because they would always end up circling back to Dallas, where they were from. And Bonnie became somewhat of a fashion icon among women at the time, young women that being that. And Bonnie was very much inspired and in love with the current movie stars at the time, having a slew of movie and romance magazines that she would read while they were on the run. I actually found a really cool and brilliant YouTube channel called The Ultimate Fashion History. And she actually did an episode on Bonnie Parker and goes more in depth about her fashion, where she got it, who she was influenced by, and also the fashion of the time. So like, who were the big movie stars? What was going on? What was the norm of fashion in the 30s? So if historical fashion interests you, I highly recommend it. I've personally been down a pretty big historical fashion wormhole and just general history hole recently on YouTube, and it's really amazing the content that people are creating and putting out there. And I gotta say, it is definitely, at least in my opinion, 100% better than the crap you get on cable television. Like, remember back when the History Channel actually did history documentaries, but now just does ancient aliens or like Pawn Stars, like shit that has nothing to do with history, essentially. I mean, YouTube, for all the drama that the YouTubers seem to be going through, I mean, depending on what you follow, it does have some really brilliant creators on there. And I personally hope to be one of them someday, so you just stay tuned to that, folks, okay? Anywho, getting a little off track, let's get back to the story at hand. And I'll be sure to hit back on the cultural impact that Bonnie and Clyde had, because it became more apparent after their deaths. So Clyde helps his gang break out of Eastham prison, and in the process, Major Joe Grosson is killed, which leads to Frank Hammer coming out of retirement to track down the Barrow gang and put an end to all the bloodshed and robberies. On Easter Sunday in April of 1934, Clyde and gang member Henry Melvin shot and killed 2 highway patrolmen near Grapevine, Texas. It was said by an eyewitness that Clyde and Bonnie had fired the fatal shots, but the story was later discredited. When Henry was eventually captured, he later admitted that he fired the first shot, and when Bonnie approached the dying officers, it was actually in an attempt to help them, not kill them. However, it has also been assumed that Bonnie was asleep in the car when the attack on the patrolman happened. Of course, media and the movies have taken liberties with this account, and in the Highwaymen movie, it's depicted of Bonnie limping on by and shooting one of the officers with a sawed-off shotgun. What we do know, though, is that word quickly spread, and even though the account of the eyewitness was later discredited, the Grapevine killings became a sensationalized story, with the details being exaggerated. The story proved to shift the tide of public perception of Bonnie and Clyde from being an idolized romantic story of sticking it to the man to one of outcry for the extermination of the Barrow gang. This public outcry motivated the authorities to take more action against the gang. Highway Patrol boss L.G. Ferris placed a $1,000 reward for the, quote, dead bodies of the grapevine slayers, end quote. He didn't give a fuck about them coming in alive. I mean, he knew that it would result in a shootout. And even the Barrow Gang knew that the only way they would go down is if they were killed. And for the governor of Texas, Ma Ferguson, well, she added an additional $500 on top of it. This was a pretty big deal because this meant that for the first time, Bonnie Parker had a bounty on her head. And for those of you who are curious, $1,000 in 1934 would be just a little more than $19,000 in 2020. Public hostility only increased for the Barrow Gang when just 5 days later, after the Grapevine murders, Clyde and Henry murdered 60-year-old Constable William Cal Campbell near Commerce, Oklahoma. The gang had also kidnapped Commerce Police Chief Percy Boyd and crossed state lines into Kansas. They had ended up letting Percy Boyd go, going so far as to give him a clean shirt and a few dollars, and also a request from Bonnie to tell the press that she did not, in fact, smoke cigars. For the photo of her posing, holding a gun in her hand and a cigar in her mouth, had circulated the newspapers, which Bonnie hated because she really did not smoke cigars and they were portraying her in a bad light. But I mean, hello sister, you're going to be going around with these vigilantes and doing all these naughty things. How do you expect the media to portray you? Not in a favorable light, I would assume, okay? One of the reasons why it took so long to actually stop Bonnie and Clyde, as well as a lot of the other gangsters and public enemies at the time, was because they crossed state lines, and at the time, the FBI, as we know it today, wasn't technically in existence. Sure, the Bureau of Investigation was started in the summer of 1909 and is considered the formal beginning, but it did not become the Federal Bureau of Investigation until July 1st, 1934. In which they were finally able to implement national training programs for police, as well as carry firearms and make arrests. Although it should be said that legislation was in the works in May and June of 1934 to give the special agents the authority to carry firearms and arrest people. Prior to that, they were only able to make citizens arrest and to hand over the suspect to the local authorities or to a U.S. Marshal. It's all very interesting how all the history is interconnected. I know we have some really cool books at work, such as Flowers of the Killer Moon by David Grann and The Year of Fear, Machine Gun Kelly and the Manhunt That Changed the Nation by Joel Urschel. 2 books that I've put on my reading list but have not yet started. Perhaps when I do get around to reading them, I will do an update on Bonnie and Clyde should I find anything super interesting and worth talking about again. Flowers of the Killer Moon is actually being made into a movie, which is being directed by Martin Scorsese and due to come out sometime next year in 2021. So if you're interested in that, by all means, please keep your eyes on the lookout for that. So in mid-April of 1934, the Barrow Gang is on the lam yet again. This time they are hiding out on a farm that was owned by Henry's father, Iverson, in Acadia, Louisiana. Now, according to my book, Deadly Duos, it says that Henry begged his father to make a deal with the law so that he wouldn't end up like Bonnie and Clyde, waking up dead. In the movie, The Highwaymen, though, Hammer confronted Iverson himself, asking him to get his kid Henry to set up Bonnie and Clyde, and in exchange, wouldn't get shot and would get a fair sentencing. On the morning of May 23rd, 1934, Frank Hammer and the group of men he'd gathered for the ambush hid in the woods near the road that Bonnie and Clyde were due to drive down. Ivor Methvin was told to park his truck on the side of the road and to remove a tire. Hammer knew that when Bonnie and Clyde drove down and saw him, that Clyde would pull over and help Ivor with the truck. 9:15 that morning, a beige Ford truck came bounding down the dirt road, stopping as it came upon Ivor's truck. Dallas police officer Ted Hinton made a positive ID on the couple and informed Hammer, who immediately yelled, "Fire!" Gunfire rained down upon the car like hellfire. Ted Hinton described the last moments of Bonnie and Clyde in his co-authored book, Ambush.
Bonnie screams, and I fire, and everyone fires. A drumbeat of shell knives through the steel body of the car, and glass is shattering. For a fleeting instant, the car seems to melt and hang in a kind of eerie and animated suspension. Clyde is slumped forward, the back of his head a mat of blood. I scramble over the hood of the car, and I throw open the door on Bonnie's side. The impression will linger with me from this instant. I see her falling out of the open door, a beautiful and petite young girl, and I smell a light perfume against the burned cordite smell of the gunpowder.
In the official report by parish coroner Dr. J.L. Wade, he listed that there were 17 separate entrance wounds on Clyde's body and 26 on that of Bonnie. One shot had snapped Clyde's spinal column. Mortician C.F. Boots Bailey had mentioned having difficulty embalming the bodies due to all the bullet holes. And I can personally attest that yes, any sort of puncture such as that, and in that extreme quantity, would make embalming a nightmare. Word quickly spread that Bonnie and Clyde had been killed, and when their bodies were brought into the town, a mob formed. 2 officers were in charge of guarding the bodies, but with the massive crowd that was gathering, they soon lost control. One woman went so far as to cut off a bloody lock of hair from Bonnie, as well as scrap of her dress, both of which were later sold as souvenirs. Coroner Wade said he saw the following once he had arrived on scene.
Nearly everyone had begun collecting souvenirs, such as shell casings, slivers of glass from the shattered car windows, and bloody pieces of clothing from the garments of Bonnie and Clyde. One eager young man had opened his pocket knife and was reaching into the car to cut off Clyde's left ear.
The car was towed to the Conger Furniture Store and Funeral Parlor in downtown Artica, Louisiana, with the dead bodies of Bonnie and Clyde still inside. The population of the small town swelled from 2,000 to 12,000 people within hours of the news of the killing. Beer that had normally sold for 15 cents now sold for a quarter. Clyde's father, Henry, was called in to identify the body of his dead son, who had been shot in the head with a .35 Remington Model 8. He then proceeded to weep in a rocking chair in the furniture section of the store. And remember the Undertaker and his girlfriend that were kidnapped by the Barrow Gang? Well, H.D. Darby and Sophia Stone were asked to come to Arcadia from nearby Ruston to identify the bodies. Bonnie was right when she laughed when Darby told her his profession. She remarked that one day he may very well work on her body. And indeed he did. Darby assisted C.F. Bailey with the embalming. Even though Bonnie and Clyde had wanted to be buried next to each other, Bonnie's family was having none of it. Bonnie's mother wanted her daughter to be brought back home, but the mob surrounding her house made it impossible. Over 20,000 people attended Bonnie Parker's funeral, which was held on May 26th. Flowers reportedly poured in from everywhere, some allegedly including cards from Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. According to the Wikipedia page, the biggest flower spread was from the Dallas City Newsboys, who, thanks to their sudden deaths, had helped them sell over 500,000 newspapers in Dallas alone. Clyde had a fairly large turnout for his private funeral, but not to the extent of Bonnie's. He was buried next to his brother Buck, where they both shared a grave marker with the epitaph, "Gone, but not forgotten." Bonnie's marker says, "As the flowers are all made sweeter by the sunshine and the dew, so this old world is made brighter by the lives of folks like you." Funny enough, Bonnie and Clyde had insurance policies that were paid out by the American National Insurance Company in Galveston, Texas. However, since then, the policies have changed so that it excludes any payouts in cases of death caused by any criminal acts by the insured. That summer, a new federal statutes were passed that made bank robbery and kidnapping federal offenses. And it seems that the deaths of Bonnie and Clyde had a sort of domino effect with other gangsters. For 2 months later, John Dillinger was killed in Chicago. Or was he? There are some conspiracy theories on this. 3 months after that, Pretty Boy Floyd was killed in Ohio. And 1 month after that, Babyface Nilsson was killed in Illinois. 2 gang members, Hamilton and Palmer, who were a part of the Easton breakout in January of 1934, were eventually recaptured and executed in the electric chair. W.D. Jones would later talk about the gang's sex lives, which raised eyebrows about Clyde's ambiguous sexuality. He was convicted of the murder of Doyle Johnson and served a sentence of 15 years. He later gave an interview to Playboy magazine when the 1967 movie Bonnie and Clyde was coming out, saying that life was not all that glamorous. On August 4th, 1974, W.D. was killed by a jealous boyfriend of a woman whom he was trying to help. It had been a misunderstanding. Henry Methvin was convicted in Oklahoma of the murder he committed and was paroled in 1942, but was later killed by a train in 1948. Some reports say that he was drunk and fell asleep on the tracks. Others say that someone had pushed him, seeking revenge. Unfortunately, his father Ivy was struck and killed in 1946 in a hit and run. And let us not forget Bonnie's husband, Roy Thornton, who she never formally divorced. He was in prison for robbery in March of 1933 and was later killed by prison guards on October 3rd, 1937, while trying to escape from Easton Prison. Frank Hammer returned to retirement and later died in 1955 at the age of 71 after several years of poor health. And the infamous death car of Bonnie and Clyde is still on display as of 2019 at Whiskey Pete's Casino in Primm, Nevada. As Bonnie once wrote in her poem, "Someday they'll go down together and they'll bury them side by side. To a few it'll be grief, to the law a relief. But that's the death for Bonnie and Clyde." And that, folks, is the ballad of Bonnie and Clyde. Now for the moment that you've all been waiting for. Let's talk about their astrological compatibility.
All right.
Thank you, Matthew. So starting with Miss Parker, her birthday was on October 1st, 1910, which makes her a lovely Libra. Her moon sign is in Virgo, and her Venus is also in Virgo. For the sake of these episodes, I will be focusing on the Sun, Moon, and Venus signs in general for each person, but we'll do an overall compatibility using the Cafe Astrology website. # not sponsored. For those of you who may care, Bonnie has only 3 planets in retrograde in her chart: Mercury, Saturn, and Pluto. What I find interesting is that she has 0 fire signs, but is heavily weighted with 5 earth and 4 air signs. Now, for Mr. Barrow, his birthday was on March 24th, 1909, which makes him an Aries. His Venus is in Pisces, and his moon's in Taurus. He only has 2 retrograde planets, Jupiter and Neptune. And his chart is also very heavily weighted with 4 earth signs, but only 1 air sign. He has a bit more water with 3 signs and just 2 fire signs. Bonnie only had 1 water sign in her chart. Back in the first episode of season 2, when I did the general list of the gist of the season, I talked about general supposed compatibility of the zodiac signs. Aries traditionally makes best love matches when paired with Leo, Libras, and Sagittarians, and Libras are best with Aries, Leos, and Sagittarians. Well, isn't that nice how that all works out for them? When I look at the book 365 Birthdays Interpreted by Michelle Knight, which is different than the Element Encyclopedia of Birthdays, by which I used last season, and don't worry, I will be using that again this season. The 365 book is neat because at the end of each zodiac sign, there is this love compatibility chart that is made up of all the signs with these boxes. The columns are then checked off with symbols if the 2 signs are compatible in that particular area. There are 8 areas in total for compatibility that the chart covers. Those are fun, romance, loyalty, adventure, passion, chilling out, spontaneity, and attentiveness. So when you look at the Aries chart and then look down the Libra column, you'll see that all 8 boxes are filled in. Same goes with Leo as well. However, according to this chart, Aries and Sagittarius are not all that compatible when it comes to loyalty or attentiveness. The Libra compatibility chart is basically full with every sign. They have the ability to be romantic and adventurous with every sign of the zodiac. They also tend to have fun with every sign except Scorpio, which I personally find a little amusing. Now, if we remember from season 1 on Libra, we'll recall that their ruling planet is Venus, the planet of love. So it makes perfect sense that they would be romantically compatible with all the signs. However, the same cannot be said about Taurus, whose ruling planet is also Venus. And I honestly think that this boils down to the fact that Taurans are an earth sign, which are also symbolized as the bull, where they can be very stubborn and slow moving, whereas Libra is the only sign of the zodiac that is not represented by a human or an animal. They are the scales, and they like balance, so they're going to be more agreeable. Plus, they're an air sign, so they are great communicators, much like Geminis that get along with everybody. By the way, guys, if you haven't listened to season 1 of Murder is My Sign, I highly encourage you to do so, especially the zodiac specific episodes, because I go into much more depth about each sign as far as like the mythology, the stories behind it, the key characteristics than I will probably do in this season. And when I look at the love matcher common language chart that is found at the end of each sign in the Astro Twins Zodiac Love Book, I gotta laugh because the charts in there do not paint the Aries-Libra match in a favorable light. Now, keep in mind, this book in particular covers the male side of the zodiac, and what I mean by that is that each chapter is written about the Aries man, or the Taurus man, or the Sagittarian man. So the chart is laid out with your sign, whatever, and then whatever sign he is, and then it breaks down into what he thinks that you're like, and what you think he's like, and what your common language could be. So for the Aries man, because Clyde was an Aries and Bonnie was a Libra, he would think that Bonnie would be sweet and charming, but a bit too delicate for his straightforward style. And Bonnie, well, she would think that he's too rough around the edges for her refined taste. But their common language would be social causes, issues, parties, music, and art. Social causes. Like how much they both hate the law and how they were raised and the time period in which they're growing up in? Yeah, probably. Let's talk about their charts and how they look together using the Cafe Astrology website. So here is where I need to go over some terminology when it comes to reading charts, especially when it comes to compatibility. So bear with me. I'm still working on memorizing this myself, and I'm going to do my best to dumb it down for everyone. So within your chart, there are what is called aspects. An aspect is the relationship between two planets and is based entirely on how many degrees apart they are. Aspects are characterized as major, the most powerful, and minor, the less powerful. There are 5 major aspects and 4 minor ones, and you might have heard of these before if you follow astrologers on YouTube, read your personalized daily horoscope, or things like that. I will define the aspects as they come up, but if you're interested in learning more, Google is always your friend and a great resource for this. I'm not going to go through their entire chart because that would take forever, and we are already running on about 30 minutes now, but I will touch on some of the items that caught my eye while I was reading their chart. So, Clyde's moon was trining Bonnie's Mars at 134 degrees. So this is a positive aspect. A great physical passion, and as with every passion of this type, things can get stormy and heated. However, most of the time, the storms are sexy and exciting. Very passionate aspect, as it promises feelings of behind the physical act. They desire each other always. The physical relations between the two are enhanced with desire and warmth. Great passion that does not fizzle out. And a trine is the most harmonious of the aspects, bringing advantage and ease. The only negative would be is if someone had too many trines in their chart. And also a trine is when two planets are 120 degrees apart or within 9 degrees plus or minus of that. And by the way, for like this kind of stuff, I'm also consulting my handy dandy, the only astrology book you'll ever need by Johanna Maritime Woolfolk, which I used last season. But you can, like I said earlier, easily use Google to get all this information and to read up on it too. So anywho, so when Bonnie and Clyde first met, they hit it off immediately, and it was kind of like a love at first sight type deal, even though Clyde's sexuality apparently came into question. And I'm thinking perhaps more he was like bisexual, but he and Bonnie were still very physical together. And it could also be like one of those things like they could have just been very like in touch with each other on a very deep spiritual level. It's like if you have like a best friend that just like kind of lights your soul on fire, and it's not even like a sexual relationship, it's just like you guys understand each other to your core. That's kind of like the relationship that I feel that Bonnie and Clyde had together. And of course, like on top of that, they had that physical chemistry together as well. And since I mentioned both of their Venus signs earlier, this part stood out to me because Clyde's Venus was in opposition of Bonnie's Venus at a negative 106 degrees, which would make this a challenging aspect because opposition, just as its name implies, is when two planets are 180 degrees apart or opposite of each other or within 9 degrees plus or minus of that. This aspect within a chart can bring strain because it's unharmonious. Although modern-day astrologers can look at an opposition less negatively than ancient times, because today they're often thought of as challenges to growth and achievement, which, depending with how you feel about challenges, if you feel like you can overcome them, then, this is just something that might be a little bit harder for you to overcome, but it can be overcome. How many times can I use that word in one sentence? I don't know. So yeah, for the challenging aspect for them, with their Venuses in opposition of each other, their styles in expressing love and their preferred way to receive love are at odds. So it's almost like their love languages don't match. They can be very different ways of handling money and different tastes in art, decoration, and entertainment. This can be a real nuisance because there can be a lot of misunderstandings and wasted energy trying to explain oneself to each other. Otherwise, it might just be fine if you agree to disagree. Now, remember, Bonnie didn't really want to be a criminal. Like, she wanted to be a star. She wanted to get out of being poor and to be much like the actresses that she idolized. And I know I didn't really talk about this a whole lot, but in the little bit of research that you'll do on Bonnie and Clyde, if you choose to go deeper into it, you'll find out that Bonnie was pretty popular within her school. Like, she was in all the plays and musicals, she wrote poetry, she loved acting, things like that. So she kind of wanted to be like a star. It was only until she met Clyde and fell in love with him that she decided to just do what he did and lead a life of crime. It was Clyde who, unfortunately, from a very young age, started stealing chickens, and unfortunately was thrown into jail at a very young age and was probably abused, and thus set him down this very dark and troubled path of hating law enforcement and doing very bad things. So, overall, though, it looks like Bonnie and Clyde's charts hold more challenging aspects than positive ones. However, just like what the Astro Twins said in their book, any sign can work with any sign. It might just take a little more effort. Even Cafe Astrology has a disclaimer that states, quote, "When analyzing compatibility, always use your own logic and intuition to put these influences together. This is the case for anything you read in the report, on the site, on other sites, and in books. These are guidelines and possibilities only, and are not meant to pass judgment on a relationship." So are you an Aries or a Libra in a relationship? If so, let me know. I would love to know what your partner sign is and if they fall into the compatibility grouping as I mentioned earlier. Are you a Libra as your partner, either Aries, Leo, or Sagittarian? That's what I'm getting at. So, anyway, so that's basically what I got for the episode here today, folks. Next week is my birthday, and it's not just any birthday, but it's my golden birthday. Holla. So it's pretty exciting. I will be turning 29 on the 29th. Welcome to Aquarian season, baby. So unlike last year, I won't be working on an episode on my actual birthday. I plan on spending it with Kyle and doing some painting. Turns out that Bob Ross actually released an episode on the very day that I was born, entitled Russet Winter. And I thought it'd be really fun to paint that. Hashtag Bob Ross Birthday Challenge. And you heard it here first, folks. I'm the one who created that challenge, so if that goes viral, it's all on me. All right? Me. So make sure you follow me on social media to see the final result of that. And if you're also interested to see if Bob Ross also released a episode on your birthday, if you look at the Wikipedia page for the show Joy of Painting, they go through all, gosh, what is it, 25 seasons? I mean, he did a lot. He did like over 400 episodes, I believe. And chances are pretty good that he did an episode either on your birthday or the day before or the day after. So I would encourage you to look at that. And if you're interested, trying to follow along and painting it. I think that'd be really fun if that challenge could take off. But that's neither here nor there. So, I am working on coordinating a new Side Slice episode with Lanier and Lucas, and we'll be bringing Kyle in on that as well, so stay tuned for that. And also, I would just like to thank Kyle for providing the voiceover work that you heard earlier in the episode for Ted Hinton and Coroner Wade. I thought it added another level to the podcast, which is always a good thing. And Kyle did such a great job doing it. So thank you so much, sweetie. I love it. And I love you. Being all mushy. And also, I hope you guys are enjoying all of the little sound clips I've been adding. I'm kind of trying to, I guess, add more, I don't want to say depth, but add more humor into this, more meme style stuff. I don't know. It makes me laugh personally. So I hope if it makes me laugh and smile, I hope it's making you, the listener, smile. So be sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, all at Jordy Death. That's Jordy Death. Speaking of YouTube, it has come to my attention that in order for me to obtain a unique URL for my YouTube page, I need 100 subscribers. So if you're able to do me the honor and find my little YouTube page and subscribe, I would really appreciate it. It will help with the continuity of my brand and make it easier for people down the road to find my YouTube page. So all you need to do is just go to YouTube, Google Jordy Death. You'll see the little Murder's My Sign little logo. Click on that, hit subscribe. All of my podcasts are directly uploaded to YouTube, and it's the audio that you'll listen to. I am working on making content and videos and behind the scenes stuff. So, but yeah, every little bit helps. You can also help me out by joining the Boneyard at patreon.com/murderismysign. Just like my beautiful death heads, Michelle, Jake, Crystal, Holly, and Jessica. Another way you can help support the show at no cost is also by sharing Murder Is My Sign with anyone you can, any way that you can. You can find MIMS anywhere you download your podcasts. Apple, Google, Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon, or your favorite podcasting app. If you want to email the show directly, you can do so at murderismysignpodcast@gmail.com. That will do it for this episode and for the Ballad of Bonnie and Clyde. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. I will catch you all next week with a new Side Slice episode. Until then, take care of yourself and each other and rest in peace.